Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of the victims of these senseless crimes. The loss of their loved ones in such a tragic manner is heartbreaking, and their memories will forever be honored and cherished. Serial killers' notorious acts make us rethink humanity. Their deep and dark acts disgust and intrigue us all at once. But what exactly goes on inside these monsters' heads? And what makes them do what they do? In all three cases we have in store for you today, you'll find the mind of a serial killer from three different corners of the globe. From Tennessee, a man that brutally killed a 9-year-old girl and left her body to be torn apart by wild animals. From Tokyo, Japan, a mother who killed her child's 5-year-old classmates. And from Leipzig, Poland, a handsome psychopath who got such a high from killing women, and, due to his methods, the media even gave him the nickname the Scorpio. So does the place where one is raised correlate to such heinous acts of crime? Let's find out in today's video about these three lesser spoken of serial killers. The first case began July 3, 1996, in Clarksville, Tennessee. A 9-year-old angel of a child fell victim to a fake police officer and had her innocence ferociously taken away. Jacqueline Beard was a friendly, happy, and well-liked child. While playing with her brother and friend at a local mud hole, a stranger approached who would end up changing Jacqueline's life forever. From the very beginning, the stranger preyed on the children's innocence. To earn the children's trust, he introduced himself as an undercover police officer named Tommy Robertson and threw his first bait. He promised the children that he would bring them fireworks and take them swimming. However, the children were more clever than he expected and they did not go with him. Instead, Jacqueline ran home to get her mom, Jeannie Meyer. When Jacqueline returned with her mom, Robertson had stuck to his promise and brought fireworks to the children at the mud hole. Robertson continued to impersonate an undercover police officer and even warned Jacqueline's mom about all the sickos in the world. He also appeared to be carrying a walkie-talkie, but didn't ever communicate through it. Jeannie's intuition sounded the alarm, both from the warning about the sickos in the world and the unused walkie-talkie. She decided to listen to her intuition and rejected Robertson's offer to take the children swimming, and instead brought them home. Once home, Jeannie talked to the children about strangers. She even instructed the children to avoid strangers, warning them that people might lie about who they are and that some individuals even carry fake police badges. She wasn't sure or certain about it, but perhaps the maternal instinct in her had kicked in, and she was sure that it was not wise to keep in touch with Robertson. However, on the afternoon of July 8, 1996, at approximately 1:30 p.m., Robertson appeared again at the Meyer residence. This time, he used another bait to lure Jacqueline in. He claimed that he had lost his keys when they first met at the mud hole and asked to keep an eye out for them. Recognizing the situation, Jeannie immediately responded that neither she nor the children would be in the area where they had met earlier, as she had a doctor's appointment in about 30 minutes. But Robertson objected that this reason was not good enough and kept the conversation going with seemingly random topics. He knew the fish was almost caught in the net, and now he couldn't let it escape. Later, after the conversation, Jeannie observed Robertson walking down the hill in front of their home, heading towards a nearby abandoned trailer, and assumed she had finally chased him away. But little did she know that disaster was about to follow. On the morning of Jacqueline's disappearance, Jacqueline was on her way to a doctor's appointment, but asked her mother if she could go outside to pick blackberries to take to the doctor's office. Her mother refused at first, but after more requests, allowed Jacqueline to go. And so Jacqueline, adorned in her Mickey Mouse t-shirt, teal blue shorts, and a pair of new multicolored leather-woven sandals, headed out to pick some blackberries. Although Jeannie had told her daughter that they would be leaving in 15 minutes for the doctor's appointment and instructed her not to go looking for the lost keys, 15 minutes passed and Jacqueline didn't show up. Worried and anxious, Jeannie went to look for Jacqueline, calling for her, but received no response. Jeannie knew where to find Jacqueline. Jeannie, along with her son, drove straight to the area known as Withlow's Hollow, where they had first met the fake Tommy Robertson the week before. During their drive, they continued to call out Jacqueline's name, but still received no response. They even asked the property owner of Withlow's Hollow if he had seen the child, but he hadn't. The property owner even mentioned that he hadn't seen a white vehicle in the area that day. This part of the puzzle was crucial, as the fake Tommy Robertson always showed up to the Myers residence in a white car, and now it had disappeared into thin air. The family asked everyone if they'd seen the child, and finally, they got a clue. After leaving a note for her husband, Jeannie knocked on the neighbor's door and asked if they knew anyone named Tommy Robertson. The neighbor, Mike Smith, testified that he saw a white vehicle with a black front end driving in the direction of Withlow's Hollow around noon or 1 p.m., and saw the same vehicle pass by his house again around 2 p.m. A chill ran down Jeannie's spine. She feared the very person she was trying hard to avoid had abducted her daughter. Now, every minute ticking by felt like an eternity to her. During Jeannie's search, she saw what she believed were a set of footprints up the side of a bank and down the road in front of the abandoned trailer. She also saw a set of footprints that she believed looked like her daughter's near the mud hole. So without wasting any time, she returned home shortly after 3 p.m. Her husband was home, and Jeannie told him that Jacqueline was missing and that the man who had identified himself as Tommy Robertson had been at their house earlier. At approximately 3:26 p.m., Jeannie and her husband called for 911. Law enforcement officers soon arrived, along with a K-9 unit, to search for Jacqueline. She had now been kidnapped for about an hour and 45 minutes. But Jeannie wasn't the only one connecting the dots. This is William Glenn Rogers, the real name of the phony Tommy Robertson. At some point after 6 p.m., he arrived home in muddy pants. He told his wife he had been in a tobacco field on Dover Road. However, according to Mrs. Rogers, what's contradicting was Robertson's pants were muddy at the knees and looked like they had been wiped off. Although his pants were muddy, Mrs. Rogers noticed that his shoes were clean. She also noticed that there was a spot of blood on his shirt. But when Mrs. Rogers questioned her husband about the blood, he responded that he must have cut his finger, which was again a lie because she didn't find any signs of his finger being hurt or cut either. Mrs. Rogers had been waiting for her husband to come home as she needed her car to take her granddaughter to school. Yes, the white car was his wife's. She quickly took the keys and went inside the car, and there she saw something unusual. She noticed small fingerprints on the passenger side windshield, which appeared to be dragging down the window. It looked as if a child had struggled there. Mrs. Rogers again asked her husband if a small child had been in her car, and he firmly denied it. But Mrs. Rogers knew something was up. Though she didn't know exactly what happened, she knew something definitely went down with William Rogers. Her suspicions were further confirmed when she noticed that the car was running out of fuel, even though she had given him money to put gasoline in the car earlier that day. Meanwhile, Nashville police printed a composite drawing of the suspect in the newspaper as described by Mrs. Meyer. Sergeant Brian Prentice received 3 telephone calls based on the newspaper. One of the phone calls came from Jerry Wayman. He said that he had sold the suspect a cellular telephone prior to July 8th. Based on the information from the telephone calls, Sergeant Cliff Smith attempted to locate the suspect. Eventually, William Glenn Rogers was arrested and charged with kidnapping Jacqueline Beard. While officers began interrogating Rogers as to where to find Jacqueline, she had still not been found. Jeannie held on to hope that she might see her daughter again. Upon interrogation, Rogers confessed to vehicular homicide. In a series of inconsistent statements, He claimed that he accidentally ran over Jacqueline, drove to a bridge, and tossed her body into the Cumberland River below. However, when officers went to investigate, they couldn't find the body or her remains. On November 8, 1996, 4 months after Jacqueline disappeared, 2 deer hunters discovered a terrifying sight: a human skull in the middle of a remote wooded area in land between lakes in Stewart County. As the hunters looked closer, they realized the skull was not of an adult, but rather of a child. The day before Jacqueline went missing, Rogers had visited land between the lakes with his wife. On their way home, Rogers and his wife stopped for a picnic, and Rogers told her that he had just discovered an area so remote you could bury a body back here and nobody would ever find it. After discovering the skull, the DNA analysis of the teeth established that the mitochondrial DNA sequence matched the DNA sample from the victim's mother. The police went to further investigate where the skull had been found. There, the officers found the skeletal remains of Jacqueline Beard scattered around the area, several hundred yards from the Cumberland River and approximately 48 miles from her home. Additionally, both of the victim's sandals were found at the scene, as well as the Minnie Mouse shirt and blue shorts Jacqueline was wearing when she disappeared. Her shirt had been turned completely inside out, and further DNA and forensic testing confirmed that human semen stains were on the inside crotch of her shorts. From this evidence, police were certain that Rogers first abducted the 9-year-old, killed her. Though DNA sequencing could not be obtained from the semen stains for comparison to the DNA samples provided by Rogers, fibers consistent with carpet in Rogers' house were found in his car and on the victim's shorts. Dr. Murray K. Marks, a forensic anthropologist, later testified that after examining the victim's skeletal remains, the remains had been in the area for 3 to 10 months. Dr. Marks explained that some of the victim's bones, like the hands, feet, and one entire leg, and the lower part of another leg, were never actually recovered and probably had been removed from the scene by animals. At sentencing, the court further noted Rogers' prior convictions for 2 counts of aggravated assault. However, Rogers was not ready to accept the fact that he had actually committed the crime. Rather, he made several additional, sometimes contradictory statements about his involvement in the victim's death. When he realized that no one believed him, he played the victim card and presented evidence of his difficult and abusive upbringing. According to him, his stepfather used to beat him. In at least one instance, his stepfather had even used a baseball bat and had rubbed Rogers' face in urine and excrement when Rogers wet the bed or soiled his pants. When Rogers tried to run away, his mother and stepfather chained him to his bed. Rogers was also prohibited from seeing his biological father, was often not fed for days, and was sexually abused by several adults, including his stepfather's brother. These psychological torments at a young age, Rogers claimed, shaped him into who he was. Seeking to avoid the death penalty, Rogers also presented psychological and psychiatric evidence. While unpersuasive at trial, after spending 2 decades behind bars, Rogers' death sentence was overturned. However, the plea was in vain, and Rogers' death sentence remained overturned. While in the case of Jacqueline Beard, a mother had to endure extreme pain, in this case, a mother caused the pain. Sometimes, while a mother is good to her own flesh and blood, to other children she can be nothing more than a monster. This is Zheng Yongchun. Zheng Yongchun moved to Japan in 2004, married a Japanese man, and settled near Tokyo. 2 years later, she enrolled her child at a local school. On February 17, 2006, Zheng was to drive her child to school, as well as 2 of the child's classmates, 5-year-old Wakana Takatomo and Jin Sano, as part of a carpool arrangement. However, Takatomo and Sano never reached school that day. The investigation to look for the kids began, but the unthinkable had already happened. A passerby in Nagahama Shiga Prefecture, a small town 300 kilometers south of Tokyo, discovered Takatomo dead on a rural road. His body lay lifeless and covered with blood from head to toe. Even before the authorities tried to wrap their heads around what they had just seen, Sano's body was recovered in an irrigation stream, once again covered with blood head to toe. The kids were dead, but what kind of monster could have killed two innocent kids so brutally? Forensic reports confirmed that the kids were brutally murdered and had likely suffered painful deaths. But what happened? The investigation would discover that Zheng, the carpool mom, had stabbed both kids to death. Forensic evidence determined that she had killed the two classmates with a thin, 20-centimeter-long fish-cutting blade. Examiners noted that the kids, just 5 years old, were so delicate and young that a single stab would have killed them instantly. However, Zheng was so cruel she did not stop with just a single stab. She had stabbed Takatomo 19 times and stabbed Jin Sano 13 times. Takatomo was declared dead at 9:45 a.m. Shortly after, she was taken to a hospital. Sano died around noon at the same hospital. Upon interrogation, Zhang presented a totally absurd motive behind the killings. Zhang admitted that her daughter had been bullied by the victims, and, therefore, she killed them. After dumping the bodies, Zhang then parked the car 56 kilometers away from the crime scene. Oddly, when the police arrived, Zhang still had the knife used for the murder in her possession. Thus, based on the evidence, prosecutors demanded the death sentence. They argued that the crimes were deliberate and that Zhang was of sound mind when she committed the acts, as evidenced by the facts that she chose a sharp kitchen knife for the stabbings and drove the children to a rarely used agricultural path. Zhang's counsel called for punishment lighter than the death penalty, arguing Zhang was either mentally incompetent or only partly competent at the time of the crimes. However, Judge Hidenori Nagi determined that Zheng Yongshun was in a state of diminished responsibility. She had a strong intent to kill the two children as she stabbed deep into their backs and chests numerous times. He said, "One can only shudder at how the defendant treated people's lives so lightly." On appeal, Zheng's lawyers appealed that the punishment was too severe given her mental state. After conducting a mental exam, it was found that Zheng Yongshun was suffering from schizophrenia and was, indeed, in a state of diminished responsibility. As a result, Zheng pled not guilty when her trial opened on February 2nd. She testified, "I stabbed sand dolls, not humans," leaving the court unclear whether she was serious or just playing around. On October 16, 2007, the court finally delivered justice for both children. Zheng Yongshun was sentenced to life imprisonment despite her diagnosis of schizophrenia. While the first two cases involved murderers perhaps on their way to becoming serial killers, our last case looks at a Polish serial killer who killed almost 5 people, all unrelated to each other. This is Krzysztof Golik. Born in 1965 in Sweden, Poland, Golik, like many killers, faced major childhood trauma. His father was a miner, and his mother took care of the house. He experienced violence from an early age. His father, when not at work, would drink and beat his wife. After completing school, Golik began working at the Julia coal mine in Wałbrzych, where he worked until the mine closed in 1994. Golik then set up his own company. All the while, Golik appeared to be a normal man. However, from the inside and unknown to the world, Golik held some deep, dark desires. Golik's business was unsuccessful at bringing in the profits that he was expecting, so he chose to take a different path. That path was to become a natural predator, always on the hunt. And so he began to take down people one by one. His first victim was an almost 18-year-old named Sylvia from Poznan. Golik met her on February 6, 2001. Upon meeting, Golik brutally shot her with a gun, killing her on the spot. The gun was a silenced Scorpion-type machine gun, which eventually earned him the nickname of Scorpio. The authorities attempted to solve the murder of Sylvia, but were sadly unsuccessful. Realizing that he had committed one of the most heinous crimes and even got away with it, Golik's confidence skyrocketed like never before. He became obsessed with killing again, and so he started looking for his next victim. Just 3 days after committing the first crime, Scorpio found his next victim. Ukrainian, Lisa, working in Wrocław. But this time it wasn't just Lisa who was killed by this monster. There were 2 victims. Golik shot Lisa and her accomplice Tomasz, who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Once again, the authorities were unsuccessful in tracking down the murderer, leaving Golik free on his streak of killing more people, with no mercy or regret. In March of 2001, Golik killed 2 more people. He murdered a married couple from Wrocław, whom he most likely found by responding to their car sales offer. While astonishing that authorities couldn't catch Golik, even after multiple murders, karma finally hit back, and the smallest yet only mistake he ever made ultimately led to him being arrested. At the end of March 2001, Golik was arrested by the police, but not under the act of a suspicion of murder. Rather, according to the reports, Golik was detained because, under the influence of alcohol, he had caused an accident and tried to flee from the scene. The investigation of the ongoing murders revealed that all the bodies that were killed by the Scorpio followed a pattern. Each victim was shot several times with a characteristic execution shot in the back of the head, along with some stabbing traces on the body. Upon arresting Golik, police found the silent Scorpion-type machine gun that matched the characteristics of the weapon suspected to have been used to commit the 5 homicides. When confronted, Golik shamelessly confessed to the killings. He claimed that he first started killing in 1998 because he enjoyed watching people die in front of his eyes, the most common mindset of any serial killer. They like the blood, the flesh, the bones, and the pain a victim goes through when they kill someone. Golik's trial began in 2002. However, Golik withdrew his testimony and claimed that he only killed 1 person. He later further changed his testimony, claiming that he was witness to 3 murders, but that he had nothing to do with the Poznan murder. He also claimed that the murder he committed was carried out on behalf of a certain amount of profit and drug trafficking. However, all the evidence was against these claims. As a result, Golik was sentenced to life in prison with limited possibility for conditional release, for which he could apply earlier than 50 years, despite prosecution only asking for 40 years. At sentencing, Golik did not show any remorse, any guilt. Then, against the wishes of his lawyer, he gave up his right to appeal, a sensation in the event of a conviction for such a long sentence. Golik was imprisoned in the Wallow prison. All of these cases scream one thing: if a killer isn't arrested soon, he would likely continue to derive pleasure from murder. Therefore, officers have to remain alert at all times to prevent another innocent victim from being killed. What were your thoughts on these cases, and which one was worst in your opinion? Let us know in the comments down below.